Welcome aboard. We haven't done a live stream in a little bit, but I'm thrilled that we are going to be talking to someone who, well, the numbers may not lie. We may have on the single most popular host of any of the Locked On baseball shows. And he is so popular that people have asked, am I afraid to put him on? Well, do you know what? I'm conquering my fears, folks. We're bringing on Ryan Finkelstein of Locked On Mets to talk about what can only be described as a perfectly normal offseason. This is Locked On MLB.
You are Locked On MLB, your daily MLB podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, baseball fans, and welcome to Locked On MLB. Where's my mic? Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. This is the daily podcast. We talk about all of Major League Baseball. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. If you don't believe me, there's my lower third. Feel free to call me Sully. I am an Emmy-nominated television producer who is beginning his fifth season as a host here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I have been a baseball podcaster for well over a decade, but I brought myself here to be part of the Locked On. There's really no other way to put it, family. You can follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Instagram and on Twitter. I'm your pal Sully. I'm on Twitter at Sully Baseball, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram, or be sure to subscribe us. Subscribe to us. I left out a word there. I sounded like Frankenstein. Make sure to subscribe us on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, and tell your smart device to play podcasts Locked On MLB, or check out some of the other great shows of the Locked On Podcast Network, like, oh, I don't know, Ryan Finkelstein's Locked On Mets. And Ryan, welcome back to the show. It's been a while. It's been too long. How you doing, buddy?
Doing great. Thank you for having me. Thank you for that intro in the beginning. I appreciate that. I was a little, I don't know, shy about it. I don't like all that praise, but I do appreciate it. And then you said 5 seasons for you. I was counting for myself. I'm like, wait a minute, this is year 5 for me too. So, big year for us over at Locked On MLB.
Well, you know what they say, third time's the charm. Um, I got to say one thing. I've been making no bones about it. I've been trying to get on each host of the Locked On Podcast Network to appear at least once in this off season. First of all, because I want to get everyone's point of view, everyone's take. This is a kind of a flagship show, but also I don't want anyone to say you never talk about us.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you something. I oddly have received more than one angry tweet, YouTube comment, Instagram comment saying, "Why haven't you had Ryan Finkelstein of the Locked On Mets show?" And they usually came on like once was after I had on Ethan from Locked On Pirates, and someone said, "No one cares about the Pirates. Why won't you have Ryan Finkelstein on?" And I just want to dispel any rumors. It's not because you and I are having just a nasty feud,
No.
and I'm not afraid to have you on. It's just you and I have been playing sort of uh, email
Tag.
tag for the
Yeah.
last month, and it just hasn't, it hasn't worked out scheduling wise. But I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid to have you on.
Yeah, I
And here
took
you
I
are.
took about a 2.5 week vacation in December. So I
Yeah.
was I was doing audio only shows, so I couldn't be a guest on any podcast. So you definitely asked me before this, and whoever has been asking for me, I'm glad I'm here now. But don't take it out on Sully. It was just scheduling issues. But
I
here we
wasn't
are.
asking you. I was begging you.
Yes,
I
that's
was
that's
begging you,
exactly
and
it.
you were giving me the Heisman. You're
Yeah.
absolutely giving me the Heisman. Well, I'm kind of glad I had you on now. I had Ben Kaspick of Locked On Giants on in that perfect window of opportunity where he thought he had Carlos Correa playing for his team. I could have had you on for that perfect opportunity where you thought you were going to have him on the team. I think I had H Town on when he thought he was coming back to the Astros. I mean, like everybody, I mean, that maybe I just should have gone down all 30 teams and discuss whether or not they're going to sign Carlos Correa. Um, it looks like he passed the physical.
Yep.
So, third time's the charm with him. He's heading back to the Twins. Um, and what is your thought on the Mets being dragged into this whole Correa fiasco? And I guess thinking the Giants didn't do their due diligence when they said, "Oh, you didn't sign him. We'll sign him." And what was your take on what was happening there with the Correa to the Mets, not with the Mets or wherever?
I think this is kind of the perfect example of Steve Cohen's effect here, where he gets the call from Scott Boras and he just dives in. And it almost felt like a contract was negotiated. And like Billy Epler was maybe let in like the 11th hour. Oh, yeah, by the way, I'm going to spend $315 million on Carlos Correa. And I'm sure Epler's like, well, if you want to, Steve, I mean, by all means, it makes us better. It's a crazy 3 weeks. I mean, I was talking to Javi today. I was like, yeah, I did 3 weeks of Carlos Correa content that is now all rendered useless, but it worked out. And at the end of the day, I think Howie Rose actually said it best, the voice of the Mets. He said, the Mets basically bought an exclusive negotiating window with Correa, by agreeing to it. We'll see if there's any ramifications from Steve Cohen speaking a little bit too soon on it. But, they jumped in, they had a chance to sign him. They got scared by the medicals. I think the bottom line with this signing or now not signing is they never really needed Carlos Correa. They already
Right.
had a complete offseason. So, yes, it would have put them over the top. They would have probably been the clear cut favorite. But I still think they're in that same tier with the Dodgers, with the Padres, with the Braves, where they're ready to contend this season. And you have Eduardo Escobar as your third baseman. That many teams would like that. And they got Brett Beatty, a top prospect, waiting in the wings. So I think they're fine, but it is a little bit just disappointing when you thought that you had another superstar coming.
Yeah, I mean, I think it. I mean, in a weird way, it was almost like it was on the verge of being overkill.
Yeah.
It almost
Yeah.
reminded me of when the Yankees acquired A Rod when they already had, uh, when they already had Jeter, and it was kind of go, and it was almost to be, not almost to be, it was to be a middle finger to the Red Sox, who were at the time desperately trying to make a deal to bring Alex Rodriguez to Boston. And it was like, oh, now we got him, and we'll move him over to third. We don't care. Ha. And there was almost a sense that this was the Mets saying, "Hey, it doesn't matter if we could use him or not. He's a great player, and we'll find a place for him." I remember when the Red Sox had their previous awful ownership, and for anyone complaining about this Red Sox ownership, and it isn't on their best, looking their best right now. But they used to have the horrible Yorkies running the team and the Yorkie Trust, and they had a chance in 1990 to acquire Willie McGee, who at the
Okay.
time was the National League, led the league in hitting in the National League. And the GM of the Red Sox famously say, "Where would we play him?" And the A's, who didn't have a spot for him either, acquired him because you acquire a star player. And of course, Willie McGee got several key hits against the Red Sox in that year's postseason. When you have a chance to get a generation, I said this when I was talking about Machado and Harper sort of dying on the free agent vine a few years ago. And then the two teams that gobbled them up are now two of the elite teams in the National League after being irrelevant forever. When you have a chance to get an elite talent, sign them,
Yeah.
get them. If you and that's kind of the mentality that the Mets had was, well, whether or not we can use Carlos Correa, this is a potential Hall of Famer. Let's go for it. It's just money.
Y- Yeah, it is. And when you said overkill, it's funny because because at the 11th hour before we signed with the Giants, the Mets like hopped into the mix. Like, is this going to happen? And then very quickly it was probably leverage. And then the Giants deal happened and then it all fell apart. But at the time, I was thinking, yeah, I don't really want Correa on the Mets. It did feel like overkill. I do believe very strongly in Brett Beatty as a prospect.
Hmm.
And then it happens and you get him. And then you immediately like flip a switch. And you're like, oh, well, they got him now. This is awesome. And you talk yourself into it. Because like you said, it's a star talent. And you look at the Mets books, and now they have Nimmo in place and they have Edwin Diaz. But prior to this offseason, it was pretty much just Lindor when it came to long-term money. So you could talk yourself into, all right, two of them, same side of the infield, good friends. The defense would have been incredible. It was definitely a luxury signing, but you also, you know, we're imagining what it would look like. And so in some ways, I think perception of the Mets now is going to be that they took a step back. But again, if we look at the entire scope of their offseason, they're fine.
Yeah, and I think right now, with the kind of offseason they had, even and we're going to talk in the next segment about some of the additions and some of the losses that happened. But I think it's just a surefire bet that the Mets are going to be right in there for any postseason discussion. If you're going to make any bets, go to Bet Online. Bet Online remains your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to the Stanley Cup, to the NBA, to college basketball, men and women. They got it all at betonline.net. If you love sports podcasts, you can find those on BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline is where the game starts. We were here with the extraordinarily popular Ryan Finkelstein. By the way, I want to just give a couple of, I hate using the term shout outs, but there's really no other way to say it. The Panorama Jazz Band and Panorama Brass Club has been texting and commenting like crazy. Talk about his beloved Orioles. How you doing, buddy? George Cook, 2026, talks about how he loves the conversations I have and that he and his son listen to the show all the time. So I'm gonna make sure, clean up your act there, Ryan. I don't want to hear any more swearing or anything like that. And hey, David Samuel Blaine, who is a regular listener and a regular contributor for comments here on the chat. Let's just see what he has to say about it. He says the Mets are better off without Correa. Well, it's tough to argue against the fact that they never played a game with Correa, so we're not completely sure how he fit in or everything like that. But the one question I have before we get into the Mets off season, did you buy a Correa jersey, and do you expect to see many at the stadium?
I imagine there'll be some, right? There's got to be some people that did it, and the irony of it, it almost makes it cooler, in my opinion, is to have a Carlos
Okay.
Correa Mets jersey. It's kind of like the feud that might have. I don't know what other players are like that. Even when you have the guy that was barely with the team, Baez. I have a Jonathan VR jersey,
Hmm.
which is a story for another day from one of my. It was a long running joke for me a couple years ago, but yeah, I think that there'll be a few jerseys. I did not have one, and also to kind of comment on the Mets are better off without Correa. I did an entire podcast with that title today, basically just speaking to the fact that this is a team that will continue to spend. They might sign Machado next offseason. It just keeps them in the game for other big signings. And I think Brett Beatty is a prospect that people can really look at and think that he might be the answer at third base anyway.
Right. Well, let's take a look because it's been, in terms of the offseason, it's been a little bit of whiplash for me. And this is not even as a Met fan. And I don't dislike the Mets. I like to see the Mets do well. You hate our team, by the way. And I want to reiterate, this is a official policy of the Locked On Podcast Network that yes, I hate your team, specifically you. And yes, I am working to say things that are biased against your team and biased for the team you hate. And that goes for all 30 teams. All
Across the
30
board.
teams. I am biased against all 30 teams and clearly in favor of all 30 teams' chief rival. You take a look at their offseason. Obviously, they had the Correa situation where they didn't retain Correa. They also lost the beloved Jacob DeGrom. I'll talk about that in a second. Some of the additions, obviously, and they retained Brandon Nimmo to a long extension. They retained Edwin Diaz to a long extension. They brought in and they had Ottavino last year. If I'm not going
Yes.
crazy, right? Again,
Mhm.
Ottavino. They swiped David Robertson from the Phillies. Uh, Jose Quintana arrived from St. Louis. How do you, is it Kodai Senga? How do you pronounce the dude's name?
Yeah. Yeah. Kodai Senga. Yep.
Kodai Senga, 5-year deal. And oh yeah, Justin Verlander signed for 2 years and all the money that is ever existed in humanity. Um, so a lot of people, some people stayed, a couple people left. one kind of kicked the tires, and one Hall of Famer is hoping that he could be matched with his former teammate and have one more Cy Young season in his arm. What are your thoughts about this team that had, except for the final 2 weeks of the season, everything seemed to go right for this team. How are you feeling about it?
Well, I mean, you look at the offensive side of things, they haven't really done much, but I don't think they had to. There was only one free agent on the offensive side, that was Nemo. They brought him back. They swap Omar Narvaez for James McCann. Nice little bump in production there. And I think the prospects are going to really carry the offense. The pitching staff, I like it a lot more. Justin Verlander, Jacob deGrom. I mean, I can go on and on about how much I love Jacob deGrom. It gutted me as a fan to see him leave. I still like watch back when he returned to the mound after being injured all year, and you see the truck for SNY did such a good job, like really slow playing his entrance with Simple Man. And as a fan that watched him since 2014, you get caught up in the emotion of it. But then when you remove yourself from it, Justin Verlander is the reigning AL Cy Young. I mean, you can't tell me that is a step down. I think Kodai Senga is a higher upside play than Chris Bassett was. Bassett, I think, a little bit better floor, but I think the rotation is about the same, maybe a little bit better because you can count on Verlander more than DeGrom. But the bullpen, I actually like a lot more. I think that's the place where they improve the most. To get Robertson in there, to bring Ottavino back, to make the trade for Brooks Raley, I really like what they've done there. Obviously, retaining Diaz was the cornerstone they had to start with, but I think this pitching staff is in great shape heading into spring training, and I really don't think they have to do anything else, honestly. I think this team's ready to go.
I think one thing, and I talked about this before. Um, yes, when DeGrom has been healthy and was a 200 some odd inning guy, he was the best pitcher in baseball. Certainly, the 2 years he won the Cy Young Award. In 2018, he just had a classic old school ace season. Forget about win loss record. Always forget about win loss record. That doesn't tell you a darn thing. And we saw last year that when he is healthy, he's great. But he's never healthy. I mean, he's been missing. He hasn't. I mean, yeah, he 12 starts in the COVID season. That doesn't count. We've had 2 straight years. He has 26 starts combined in the last 2 years, and because he came up as this young great phenom, in some of our heads, we're still thinking about him as this super young pitcher. He's going to be 35 this year.
Yeah.
And the days of pitchers who, and again, he's, Verlander and Scherzer are older pitchers who are, but they've shown, the Tommy John surgery notwithstanding for Scherzer, I'm not sure for Verlander, um, they've shown more durability than DeGrom.
Yeah.
And it would be great if you got 25 to 30 starts from DeGrom. That's phenomenal, except the fact it's like, okay, over how many seasons are you going to get those 25 starts? I've always felt you're better off cutting ties with a player a year too early than a year too late. And I think that despite all the love and the homegrown and everything like that, multiple Cy Young awards, he's going to break down on Texas's dime and not on the Mets' dime. And while it's not my money, you could understand why they wouldn't commit. I understand why they wouldn't commit to that kind of money for DeGrom, no matter what he did for the team.
Yeah, and I think that, the one place that I would say that you could look at this and say, okay, it's a step back, is when healthy in a playoff situation, Jacob deGrom is the guy that you want. But that's such a big if, and you have to get to the playoffs. I really think this is what the Mets wanted all along. A couple things that make me say that. One, they offer him a 3-year deal. It came in at less than what they gave Scherzer. To me, that is a little bit indicative of, I always felt when they signed Scherzer that the starting point on a 3-year contract had to be at least the 130 that he got. Very quickly, when DeGrom's off the table, they gave Verlander the exact average annual value on his 2-year deal. So that's the first thing. We've heard that, Justin Verlander hit it off with Steve Cohen. We also heard that Jacob deGrom wanted no part of talking with Steve Cohen. I think that's a big deal in this. I think that they presented him a good enough offer so that they could say, look, we tried, but they never wanted to go beyond 3 years. The Rangers built their offseason around DeGrom. It's the right spot for him. I hope that he can prove healthy. I hope that it ends up being a great deal for Texas. But from the Mets perspective, this was an absolute slam dunk for them. You get a pitcher on a 2-year deal who's coming off a Cy Young, and a guy that just threw 175 innings compared to a guy that threw, I don't even know, definitely
Yeah,
less than 100.
yeah, and I think that one thing that I think the timing of it went very well for the Mets in that there was the gut punch of losing a beloved player, and then almost immediately we're signing in Verlander. It's like, all right, this is not business as usual. This is not your typical Mets. We are being super aggressive, and they're doing it knowing that their fan base is really, really hungry to have a victory, and also they're getting a little edgy. They don't want to have another year where they had great highlights. I mean, remember the game where they were losing 8-1 to the Phillies and they rallied. There's some great games that happened this year, but they're tired of walking off on in October with their heads down. That this is it. They need. My cousin Dave is the one of the biggest Met fans I know. He remembered watching as a kid watching '69, but mainly remembers '73. And even he is saying, I'm tired of the '86 Mets. We need to talk about a new team now.
Yeah.
Everybody in the '86 Mets. I think you know, Randy Neiman has a book at this point. Like, it doesn't anyone who pitched a little bit with that team, got themselves a book deal. Let's just quickly talk about they have added a lot to their pitching depth. Obviously Verlander is the biggest, and making sure Diaz is there for the long hold. But Quintana showed really great moments last year. Ottavino is relief depth, and Robertson, while he's no longer the All Star caliber pitcher, was got a key save in the World Series, and is someone who could uh, be a valuable contributor. And having that pitching depth so often is the name of the game for a deep October run.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think Robertson was such a nice move because not only is it, another guy that you slot into the back end to get, seventh inning, eighth inning outs, but he's got so much closer experience. I think you like him more as the guy that can kind of supplant Edwin Diaz when needed, as opposed to Adam Ottavino. You can kind of maybe keep Ottavino as more your locked in eighth inning guy. And then Robertson can really have a Swiss Army knife type role in that bullpen. I love the bullpen. And then the decision essentially was we want Kodai Senga and Jose Quintana instead of Bassett and Taiwan Walker. And
Hmm.
when you saw the contract that Taiwan Walker got with the Phillies, and then you compare it to the Quintana deal, 2 years, 26 million. I love that contract. I mean, if he goes back to being the guy he was prior to last year, he's only on your books for one more season. The Mets are really trying to focus in on this 2 to 3 year window. They've done that with pretty much all of these deals. And Senga's a big wild card. I mean, Senga might be the biggest X factor from the pitching side on this team. There's ace potential. There's thought that he could be that good, but he's also, we never really know what these guys are going to be like until we see him, in big league action. So I'm excited to see what he looks like. And I think that if he is like Tanaka's first year with the Yankees and you can roll out Scherzer, Verlander, and Senga's that good, I mean, this has a chance to be the best rotation in baseball.
It really does. Well, we are here with Ryan Finkelstein of Locked On Mets. While you were off on vacation, I did my annual suffering index, where I determine which fan bases are suffering the most. I have a formula which involves keeping into account things like years waiting for a World Series, years waiting for a pennant, number of do or die games lost, number of do or die games won, number of 100 lost seasons since the last World Series title, and everything. Um, the, of The Mets are in the top 10 of most suffering fan bases. The only ones ahead of them, and these are all through my stats. This is the Mariners, the Orioles, the Padres, the Rangers, the A's, the Brewers, the Pirates, and Cleveland are the only teams that ranked higher. The A's went through the roof because of all the do or die games they've won, either game five of the division series or one game playoffs that they've lost since '89. The Guardians are going on their seven. This is the Diamond Jubilee, 75 years since winning a World Series, and count them eight 8 do or die games lost, including 2 Game 7s of the World Series in extra innings. But the Mets don't knock them out. Not only has it been 37 years since they've won a World Series title, but the Mets have lost 4 do or die games along the way since winning the '86 World Series. That would be the 1988 NLCS, the 2006 NLCS, the 2016 Wild Card game, and last year's Game 4 of the Wild Card Series. Those are 4 that, and that does, and keep in mind that game does not, that listing does not count Kenny Rogers walking Andrew Jones with the bases loaded. That when that's the suffering there. I'm not saying this to rub the salt in the wound. I'm saying this because I was having a conversation with someone about this. You could be a long suffering New York sports fan.
Yeah.
There are, there's this notion of New Yorkers, won't accept anything but a winner. Well, then they're not an accepting lot. If you are a Jets, a Knicks, a Mets, and either an Islanders or Rangers fan, you are crawling under your bed crying most days. And I think Steve Cohen understands that, and understands that if he delivers a winner, then that will buy so much goodwill that it will, one winner will give him a lifetime of goodwill. Do you think I'm off base in that, or am I onto something?
I think you're spot on. I think that I saw something that his earnings from this past year on his hedge fund was like a 1.7 billion. So, the money doesn't matter to him. This is his, premier toy that he loves to play with, and this is a team that he loved. And, he made that essential promise 3 to 5 years they're going to win a World Series, which was courageous in some ways because baseball, it's not easy to win. You can have the Mets can win 110 games each year for the next 3 seasons of that window, and they could never make it to the NLCS. I mean, we've seen the Dodgers kind of be proof of that. But he's all in on this team. I think he's all in on spending every single, dime into every facet of the organization where they want to have a farm system, player development. Every week we hear about some new driveline hire that they've brought in. They're trying to be cutting edge so that the team doesn't have to always have a $400 million payroll, but he's looking for a winner. And if they win a World Series, it's mayhem. And I think you're already seeing kind of the growth of the franchise the last couple of years. I'm sure they're a lot more valuable now than they were when Steve Cohen bought the team. Not that he's ever going to sell it. And yeah, if I think that the thing that when it comes to a misery index as a longtime suffering Mets fan, now know as Steve Cohen, there might be a bad year, but very rarely are the Mets going to have to go through some long period of struggle. They're going to be trying to win each and every year, and that is so refreshing after the Wilpon era.
Yeah, and I can only compare this to the what the Red Sox did in '04, where at one point they just said we just got to push all the chips in and win now because this fan base is going to have a nervous breakdown. And I think especially after what happened in 2021, where they were in first place for most of the year, and then they finished sub 500, and then this year they're just this last year, so many things went right, but then the final weeks everything seemed to have the rug pulled. They're like, we can't have this anymore. All this would be prologue if they win
Yeah.
it all. And I think that they understand that. And it's what I want owners to be like, hey, this is my toy. Don't complain about Steve Cohen. Steve Cohen should be the model for a sports owner to say, I'm going to do everything I can to win because my fans want a winner. And I'm not a Met fan. I'd like to see them win. 'Cause I know so many Met fans who are just diehard fans, but you know, every fan base wants to have Steve Cohen be their owner, in my humble opinion.
100%. You couldn't have said it better. It's been so amazing to go through that change. And a lot of times I'll still have kind of my previous mindset like, yeah, that's not possible. They couldn't sign Verlander and they sign him, or they couldn't do this or that. So it's an exciting team. And I don't the whole notion that I think someone put out there at the Mets win the World Series that they bought a championship. I
So
said on
what?
my show, yeah, they did. They bought one. Who
Yeah.
cares? Who
Thanks.
cares?
Yeah. I did a whole show called "Let's Take the Stigma Away of Buying a Championship."
Yeah,
Well,
especially in this sport.
yeah,
Especially in this sport.
that's what you want. That's the owner's job, is say, I got billions of dollars and I'm going to spend it on a winner.
Yep,
Great. Great.
100%.
It's still a winner. But and you was also a winner. Ryan Finkelstein is still a winner, and he is our guest here on this Locked On MLB, Locked On Mets crossover. By the way, thanks so much for making Locked On MLB your first listen every day. Your second listen, well, have it be Locked On Mets. Third listen, have that be Locked On MLB Prospects. Host Lindsey Crosby is a prospect encyclopedia, and he's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. It's free and available where you get your podcast. And speaking of getting podcasts, Ryan, where can people listen to your great and overwhelmingly popular show?
You can find us on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. You can follow the show at Locked On Mets.
All right. And you can follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter and Instagram. I'm your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball on Twitter, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. Giving the people what they want, which is a Locked On MLB, Locked On Mets crossover with Ryan Finkelstein. I am the host of Locked On MLB, Paul Francis Sullivan. This has been Locked On MLB for the 11th day of January 2023. I already said my name, so just call